Is there anything else you'd like me to solve, Ms. Williams? When a math teacher decided to humiliate a black student by forcing him to solve an impossible equation, she never expected what happened next. Morgan Jackson, a quiet 15-year-old who always stood in the back of class due to a painful secret, was about to turn the tables on the teacher who had tormented him. Why did this brilliant young man hide his extraordinary mathematical gift? And what happened when Ms. Williams discovered the shocking truth behind his refusal to sit down in her classroom? This powerful story of prejudice, hidden talent, and unexpected redemption will leave you speechless. Watch to the end to see how one brave student changed not just his own future, but the entire school system. Watch the full story to discover how one brave teacher's hidden talents changed everything for a school trapped in outdated traditions. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Morgan Jackson stood at the back of the classroom, his tall frame leaning against the wall. His eyes were fixed on Ms. Veronica Williams as she scribbled equations across the whiteboard. The classroom was quiet except for the occasional scratch of pencils and the sharp tap of Ms. Williams' heels against the linoleum floor. And that's how we solve for x in a quadratic equation, Ms. Williams announced, turning to face her students. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on each seated student before landing on Morgan. Mr. Jackson, she said, her tone cutting through the silence. We have perfectly good chairs in this classroom. Why do you insist on standing like you're waiting for a bus? A few students snickered. Morgan shifted uncomfortably but remained standing. I prefer to stand, Ms. Williams, he said quietly. You prefer to stand, she repeated, mimicking his tone. This isn't a coffee shop, Mr. Jackson. This is a classroom, and in my classroom, students sit. Morgan felt heat rising to his face. The real reason he couldn't sit comfortably was still painful to think about. 3 weeks ago, Ms. Williams had struck him with a ruler across his lower back for what she'd called disruptive behavior, when he'd merely been helping a classmate understand a problem. The bruising had finally faded, but the pain lingered, especially when he sat for long periods. I can't sit for the whole period, Ms. Williams, Morgan said, his voice slightly stronger. I have back pain. Ms. Williams' eyes narrowed. Back pain? At 15? How convenient. She tapped her marker against the whiteboard. Perhaps if you paid as much attention to your posture as you do to avoiding class participation, you wouldn't have such problems. Jasmine, a girl who sat near the back, turned slightly in her seat to give Morgan a sympathetic look. She knew the truth. She'd seen what had happened that day. Now, Ms. Williams continued, since Mr. Jackson believes he's special enough to have his own rules, perhaps he'd like to contribute something meaningful to today's lesson. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Or does standing at the back also exempt you from class participation? Morgan straightened. I'm participating, Ms. Williams. I've been taking notes. He held up his notebook as evidence. Ms. Williams' gaze lingered on him, calculating. There was something in her expression that made Morgan's stomach tighten with apprehension. We'll see about that, won't we? She said softly, almost to herself. Then louder, class, I believe it's time for a practical demonstration. Mr. Jackson clearly needs our attention today. Morgan felt all eyes in the classroom turn to him as Ms. Williams capped her marker, a glint of determination in her eyes. He knew that look. It never ended well for the student on the receiving end. 3 weeks earlier, Morgan had been sitting in the same classroom, working through a set of equations. Darius, the new student who had transferred from another district, was struggling beside him. So you have to isolate x first, Morgan had whispered, leaning over slightly to point at Darius's paper. Then you can, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Williams's voice had cracked through the air like a whip. What part of work independently is unclear to you? Morgan had straightened in his seat. I was just helping him understand the stand up, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Williams's face had been tight with anger. Now. Morgan had risen slowly, aware of the eyes of every student on him. "Come to the front of the class." The walk to the front had felt endless. When he reached Ms. Williams's desk, she had pulled a wooden ruler from her drawer. "Turn around and place your hands on the desk." "Ms. Williams, I was only..." "Now, Mr. Jackson. Unless you'd prefer to discuss your disruptive behavior with the principal." Morgan had complied, his cheeks burning with humiliation. The sharp sting of the ruler across his lower back had brought tears to his eyes, but he'd refused to let them fall. Later that day, Mr. Thompson, the science teacher, had noticed Morgan's discomfort. "You okay, Morgan?" he had asked as students filed out of the lab. "I'm fine, sir." Mr. Thompson had given him a long look. "Ms. Williams has traditional methods," he had said carefully. "If you ever need to talk." Morgan had nodded and hurried away. He hadn't told his mother. She worked 2 jobs and had enough to worry about. Besides, who would believe him over Ms. Williams, with her 23 years of teaching experience and her reputation as a disciplinarian who gets results? In the teacher's lounge, Ms. Williams had complained to Mrs. Reynolds, the English teacher. "That Jackson boy is too smart for his own good," she had said, stirring her coffee. "Always showing off, trying to teach other students. Undermining my authority. He does have the highest math scores in his grade," Mrs. Reynolds had pointed out mildly. Book smarts, Ms. Williams had dismissed. No respect. These kids today think they can do whatever they want. Someone has to teach them there are consequences. Now, back in the present, Morgan watched Ms. Williams warily. Since that day, he'd stood at the back of the classroom, unable to sit comfortably for the full 50 minutes of class. He still completed all his work, still maintained his A average. Mathematics was his passion, his escape. Even Ms. Williams couldn't take that from him. But as he watched her eyes fix on him with determination, Morgan knew today would be different. She'd been looking for another opportunity to put him in his place. And standing at the back of her classroom, defying her seating arrangement, was the perfect excuse. "Ms. Williams," began Jasmine tentatively, "Morgan really does have..." "Did I ask for your input, Ms. Carter?" Ms. Williams cut her off, not even bothering to look in Jasmine's direction. Her focus remained fixed on Morgan, a predator eyeing its prey. "Mr. Jackson," Ms. Williams's voice carried across the classroom, sharp and clear. "Since you feel entitled to special accommodations in my classroom, perhaps you'd be willing to demonstrate your mathematical prowess to justify such privilege." Morgan remained silent, his fingers tightening around his notebook. "Come to the front, please," she said, her tone making it clear this was not a request. With deliberate slowness, Morgan moved from his spot at the back wall. Each step was measured, his face a careful mask hiding the discomfort in his back and the apprehension growing in his chest. "Ms. Williams, I really don't think," Jasmine began again. "One more word, Miss Carter, and you'll be joining him for after-school detention," Ms. Williams snapped. The classroom fell into a tense silence as Morgan reached the front. He stood beside Ms. Williams, towering over her despite being only 15. This seemed to irritate her further. "Now then," she said, turning to face the class. "Mr. Jackson believes he's too good to follow simple classroom rules. Perhaps he also believes the curriculum is beneath him." She turned to Morgan. "Is that it? Are you bored with our simple high school mathematics?" Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tyler, a basketball teammate of Morgan's, looked like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. "No, ma'am," Morgan replied evenly. "I just can't sit comfortably right now." "Can't or won't?" Ms. Williams challenged, then waved her hand dismissively. "Never mind. Since you're up here, let's make the most of this educational opportunity." She turned to the whiteboard and erased her previous work with quick, aggressive strokes. Then she began writing a new equation, one significantly more complex than anything they'd covered in class. When she finished, she stepped back with a satisfied smile. On the board was an advanced differential equation that looked like it belonged in a college textbook. "This," she announced to the class, "is the kind of problem students encounter in advanced calculus. Obviously well beyond our current curriculum. She turned to Morgan. But perhaps Mr. Jackson, who can't be bothered to sit down like everyone else, is also beyond our curriculum. A few students exchanged worried glances. Darius whispered something to Jasmine, who shook her head slightly. "Solve it," Ms. Williams said to Morgan, holding out a marker. "Show us what makes you so special." Morgan took the marker, his face still impressively calm. "May I ask what this equation represents?" "Does it matter?" Ms. Williams crossed her arms. "Either you can solve it or you can't. If you can't, then perhaps you should reconsider your special standing arrangements." Morgan studied the equation. It was familiar somehow. He'd seen something similar in one of the online courses he'd been taking in his free time. "It's a second-order non-homogeneous differential equation," he said quietly. Ms. Williams's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in her confident demeanor. Well. You can identify it. But can you solve it, Mr. Jackson?" "I'll try," Morgan said, turning to the board. Behind him, he could hear the whispers starting. "No way he can solve that. Is that even from our textbook? She's trying to humiliate him." "Shoo, she'll hear you." Morgan tuned them out, focusing on the equation before him. He took a deep breath and began to work. Ms. Williams watched with barely concealed satisfaction, certain she was about to put the arrogant boy in his place. She'd chosen an equation from her old college textbook, one that had given her own class significant trouble during her undergraduate years. "Take your time, Mr. Jackson," she said with false sweetness. "We're all very interested to see how you approach this problem that's clearly beyond a high school sophomore's abilities." Morgan paused, marker hovering over the board. Then he began writing, his movements deliberate and confident. The class watched in silence as he worked through the equation step by step. Ms. Williams's smug expression gradually shifted to confusion as Morgan applied techniques she hadn't expected him to know. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. No one spoke as Morgan filled the whiteboard with his work, occasionally erasing sections to make room for more. Ms. Williams's breathing quickened slightly as she realized what was happening. This wasn't going according to plan. The boy wasn't supposed to make actual progress on the equation. He was supposed to struggle, to admit defeat, to learn humility. Instead, Morgan worked with a focus and understanding that belied his age, applying methods that Ms. Williams herself would have struggled to recall without reference materials. "Where did you learn this?" she demanded, her voice tighter than before. Morgan didn't turn around. "I read," he replied simply, continuing his work. In the quiet of his bedroom, surrounded by stacks of mathematics textbooks, Morgan had always found peace. This was his sanctuary, where numbers made sense and equations had solutions, unlike the messy, unpredictable world of high school social dynamics. His small desk was cluttered with notebooks filled with his neat handwriting, problems solved and theories explored. Pinned to the wall above were his goals, MIT admission requirements, scholarship opportunities, and a hand-drawn timeline leading to his dream of becoming a mathematician. Morgan's journey into advanced mathematics had begun 3 years earlier when his mother had brought home a discarded calculus textbook from the community college where she worked as an administrative assistant. "Found this in the donation pile," she'd said, placing it on his desk. "Thought you might like to look through it." That book had been a doorway to a new world. Morgan had worked through it problem by problem, using online resources when he got stuck. One video had led to another, and soon he discovered Professor Raymond Chen's online mathematics lectures. The professor had noticed Morgan's insightful comments and questions on the lecture forums. After several exchanges, he'd offered to mentor Morgan remotely. "You have a natural gift for mathematical thinking," Professor Chen had written in an email. "It would be a disservice to mathematics itself if that gift weren't nurtured." Under Professor Chen's guidance, Morgan had accelerated through material far beyond his grade level. Differential equations, multivariable calculus, linear algebra, concepts that would challenge college students became Morgan's after-school companions. He kept his mathematical pursuits private, not out of secrecy but because no one had ever asked. At school, he did what was expected, completed the assigned work, and received his A's without fanfare. The depth of his understanding remained hidden, like a vast ocean beneath a calm surface. His mother knew he was good with numbers, but even she didn't fully grasp the extent of his abilities. She was proud of his good grades and supportive of his interests, but between her 2 jobs and evening classes, there was little time for detailed discussions about mathematical theories. The night before Ms. Williams' challenge, Morgan had been working through a set of differential equations Professor Chen had sent him. These represent real-world applications, the professor had explained in his email. The mathematics of change, how quantities evolve over time, responding to forces and conditions. This is the language that describes everything from population growth to the swing of a pendulum. Morgan had been fascinated by how these complex equations could model reality, how the abstract symbols on paper could capture the dynamics of the physical world. He'd worked late into the night, losing himself in the elegant solutions. Now, standing at Ms. Williams' whiteboard, he recognized the equation she'd written as similar to one he'd solved just hours before. It was a model for damped harmonic motion, the mathematical description of a spring oscillating with gradually decreasing amplitude due to friction. As he began working through it, the classroom around him faded away. There was only the problem, the marker in his hand, and the step-by-step path to the solution. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply doing what he loved most, solving a mathematical puzzle, finding order within complexity, revealing the hidden structure beneath the symbols. And as his hand moved across the whiteboard, somewhere in the back of his mind was the quiet hope that perhaps, just this once, being himself, being who he truly was, might be enough. The classroom was utterly silent as Morgan worked. The only sounds were the soft squeak of the marker against the whiteboard and the occasional rustle of clothing as students shifted in their seats, straining to follow his work. Morgan moved methodically through the equation, applying a technique known as the method of undetermined coefficients. His handwriting was neat and precise, each step clearly labeled, as Professor Chen had taught him. Ms. Williams watched with increasing disbelief. Her plan to humiliate Morgan was unraveling before her eyes. The equation she'd selected, one she remembered struggling with in college, was being dismantled by a 15-year-old boy with a calm focus that made it look almost easy. Morgan paused briefly, studying what he'd written. He erased a small section and rewrote it, refining his approach. Then he continued, applying the final steps to reach the general solution. This gives us the complementary function, he said quietly, more to himself than to the class. Now for the particular solution. Ms. Williams cleared her throat. Mr. Jackson, where exactly did you learn these methods? Her voice had an edge of suspicion. Morgan didn't look up from his work. Online courses, mostly. And some books from the library. A student in the back row whispered, "Is he actually solving it?" Another replied, "I think he is." Jasmine was watching with undisguised admiration, while Darius had abandoned any pretense of disinterest and was frantically taking notes on Morgan's process. Tyler, who had known Morgan since elementary school, was grinning broadly. He'd always known his friend was smart, but this was something else entirely. As Morgan approached the final steps of the solution, Ms. Williams moved closer to the board, scrutinizing his work with narrowed eyes, looking for mistakes, for any flaw she could use to reassert her authority. Morgan wrote the final expression, boxed his answer, and stepped back from the board. He recapped the marker and turned to face Ms. Williams. "I believe that's the correct solution," he said simply. Ms. Williams stared at the board, then at Morgan, then back at the board. The solution looked right. The methodology was sound. The steps were clear and logical. There was nothing to criticize, nothing to correct. "Where did you copy this from?" she demanded, her voice tight. Morgan blinked, genuinely confused. "I didn't copy it. I solved it." "This is college-level work," Ms. Williams insisted. "You expect me to believe you just worked through it on your own?" "Yes, ma'am," Morgan replied. "It's similar to problems I've been studying recently." The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, but nobody moved. The normal rush to pack up and leave was suspended as students waited to see what would happen next. Ms. Williams seemed to be struggling with herself, her face cycling through a series of expressions: disbelief, suspicion, and something that looked almost like fear. "Class dismissed," she finally said, her voice strangely subdued. Still, no one moved. "I said class dismissed," she repeated, louder this time. Slowly, reluctantly, students began gathering their things, casting curious glances at Morgan and the filled whiteboard behind him. "Wait." Ms. Williams's command froze the students halfway out of their seats. She turned back to the whiteboard, examining Morgan's solution more carefully. "This can't be right," she muttered, her finger tracing through his steps. "The approach is, but the coefficients." Morgan stood quietly, marker still in hand. He knew his solution was correct, but something in him, perhaps the same something that had kept him standing silently at the back of the room for weeks, prevented him from saying so. Ms. Williams pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly, presumably checking Morgan's work against a reference or calculator. The longer she looked, the deeper the furrow between her brows became. Tyler, still seated, leaned over to Jasmine. "Is she for real right now? She set him up to fail and now can't handle that he didn't." "Shoo," Jasmine warned, but her eyes were bright with a mixture of concern for Morgan and satisfaction at Ms. Williams's obvious discomfort. The teacher lowered her phone slowly, her expression inscrutable. "The solution appears, technically correct," she admitted, each word seeming pulled from her reluctantly. "However, Mr. Jackson, you must have encountered this specific problem before. There's no other explanation." Morgan shook his head. "No, ma'am. I've worked with similar differential equations, but not this exact one." "Impossible," Ms. Williams snapped, some of her usual sharpness returning. "A sophomore in high school doesn't simply solve college-level differential equations on site." She turned to address the class, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Mr. Jackson has clearly been dishonest about his preparation for this demonstration." Darius, usually quiet, surprised everyone by speaking up. "But Ms. Williams, you're the one who chose the problem. How could Morgan have prepared for something he didn't know you'd ask?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the class. Ms. Williams's face flushed. "That's enough," she said sharply. "I said class is dismissed. Mr. Jackson, stay behind." As students reluctantly filed out, several of them gave Morgan supportive nods or whispered words of encouragement. Tyler bumped his fist against Morgan's shoulder as he passed. "Absolute legend, man." When the last student had left, Ms. Williams closed the classroom door and turned to face Morgan. "Explain yourself," she demanded. "And I want the truth this time." "I've already told you the truth," Morgan said quietly. "I study mathematics in my free time. I take online courses. I read textbooks." "And who helps you with this? A parent? A tutor?" "Sometimes I email with a professor who offers guidance, but mostly I work through things on my own." Ms. Williams crossed her arms, studying him with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why go to all that trouble beyond what's required?" Morgan considered the question. "Because I love it," he said simply. "Mathematics makes sense to me. It's beautiful." Ms. Williams seemed taken aback by his sincerity. For a moment, the mask of authority slipped, and Morgan glimpsed something unexpected: recognition. As though, perhaps once long ago, she too had felt that same beauty in mathematics before something had hardened in her. The moment passed quickly. Her expression shuddered, and she gestured to the door. "You may go, Mr. Jackson," she said stiffly. "But this conversation isn't over." As Morgan gathered his belongings, Ms. Williams remained at the whiteboard, staring at his solution with an unreadable expression. Just before he reached the door, Morgan paused. "Ms. Williams," he said. "Is there anything else you'd like me to solve?" The question hung in the air between them, simple words that somehow carried the weight of a challenge, of a power shift neither of them had anticipated when the class began. Ms. Williams didn't answer. For perhaps the first time in her teaching career, Veronica Williams was completely speechless. Morgan nodded once, as if her silence had confirmed something for him, and walked out of the classroom with his head held high, leaving behind a teacher whose carefully constructed world had just been irrevocably altered. The hallway buzzed with whispers as Morgan walked to his next class. Word had spread quickly, as it always did in high school. By lunchtime, the story had evolved into something almost mythical. Morgan Jackson had solved an impossible equation, left Ms. Williams dumbfounded, and walked out like a mathematical superhero. "Dude," Tyler said, sliding onto the bench beside Morgan in the cafeteria, "you're practically famous now. Everyone's talking about what happened in Williams' class." Morgan poked at his lunch, uncomfortable with the attention. "It wasn't that big a deal." "Not a big deal." Jasmine joined them, setting down her tray. "Morgan, nobody stands up to Williams. Ever. And you didn't just stand up to her, you outmatched her at her own game." "That's the problem," Morgan said quietly. "It wasn't supposed to be a game." The conversation halted as Ms. Williams herself appeared at the cafeteria entrance, scanning the room until her eyes locked on Morgan. She marched toward them, followed by Mr. Bennett, the head of the mathematics department, and Mrs. Garcia, another math teacher. "Mr. Jackson," Ms. Williams said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet cafeteria. "You need to come with us. Now." Morgan stood slowly. "What's this about?" "Academic dishonesty," she replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Cheating." A collective gasp swept through the cafeteria. Morgan felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment. "I didn't cheat," he said firmly. "We'll discuss this in private," Mr. Bennett interjected, looking uncomfortable with the public confrontation. Morgan followed the teachers out of the cafeteria, aware of every eye on him. As they walked down the hallway toward the administrative offices, Ms. Williams began her accusation. "There is absolutely no way a sophomore student could solve that equation without prior knowledge," she insisted to Mr. Bennett. "He must have seen the problem before or had outside help." "I've never seen that specific problem," Morgan repeated, struggling to keep his voice even. They reached the conference room where Principal Jackson was waiting. She was a stern woman with kind eyes, known for her fairness. "Ms. Williams has raised some serious concerns," the principal began after they were all seated. "She believes you had prior knowledge of the equation she asked you to solve today." "I didn't," Morgan said. "But I have studied differential equations on my own. The problem she gave was similar to others I've worked on." Mrs. Garcia, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "You're saying you study college-level mathematics independently? At 15? "Yes, ma'am." "Can anyone verify this?" Mr. Bennett asked. Morgan hesitated. "I have emails from Professor Chen at MIT. He's been mentoring me online. And my notebooks at home are full of my work." Ms. Williams scoffed. "Convenient. And why haven't you ever mentioned these advanced studies before? Why hide your supposed mathematical genius until now?" "No one asked," Morgan said simply. "And it's not like that. I'm not a genius. I just love math and work hard at it." The principal studied him thoughtfully. "Morgan, why were you standing in class today? Ms. Williams mentioned this has been an ongoing issue." Morgan's jaw tightened. This was the question he'd been dreading. He looked directly at Ms. Williams, whose expression remained challenging. "I have back pain when I sit for too long," he said carefully. "Back pain?" Mrs. Garcia echoed skeptically. "At your age?" "Yes," Morgan confirmed, not breaking eye contact with Ms. Williams, whose face had gone very still. "It started about 3 weeks ago. After Ms. Williams disciplined me for helping another student during independent work time." A heavy silence filled the room. "Disciplined how, exactly?" the principal asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "Morgan, are you saying that Ms. Williams physically disciplined you?" Principal Jackson's voice was measured, but her eyes had narrowed significantly. The conference room fell silent. Mr. Bennet shifted uncomfortably in his seat while Mrs. Garcia's eyebrows rose in surprise. Ms. Williams sat rigidly, her hands clasped so tightly on the table that her knuckles had whitened. Morgan took a deep breath. He hadn't wanted to get into this, hadn't wanted to be the student who complained or caused trouble. But the accusation of cheating, that was a line he couldn't allow to be crossed. "Yes, ma'am," he finally said. "3 weeks ago, Ms. Williams struck me across my lower back with a ruler when she thought I was disrupting class. I was helping Darius understand a problem." "That's absurd," Ms. Williams interjected. "I never." "Please, Ms. Williams," Principal Jackson held up her hand. "Morgan, continue. The bruising has mostly healed, but it still hurts to sit for long periods. That's why I've been standing in her class." Principal Jackson's expression was grave. "Why didn't you report this at the time?" Morgan looked down at his hands. "I didn't think anyone would believe me over Ms. Williams. And my mom works 2 jobs plus takes night classes. She has enough to worry about." "I categorically deny these false accusations," Ms. Williams declared. "This is clearly an attempt to deflect from his academic dishonesty." The principal turned to her. "Ms. Williams, corporal punishment is strictly against school policy. If what Morgan is saying is true." "It's not," Ms. Williams insisted. "This is outrageous. First, he somehow solves a college-level equation that he shouldn't be capable of solving, and now he's inventing stories to avoid consequences." The tension in the room was palpable when a knock at the door interrupted them. The school secretary poked her head in. "Morgan's mother is here," she announced. "She says she received an urgent call about her son." "I didn't call her," Principal Jackson frowned. "I did," Mrs. Garcia admitted. "I thought she should be present for this discussion." Ms. Williams shot Mrs. Garcia a betrayed look as Diane Jackson was shown into the room. She was still wearing her administrative assistant uniform from the community college, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, moving immediately to Morgan's side. "Is everything all right?" Principal Jackson quickly explained the situation, both Ms. Williams' accusation of cheating and Morgan's counter-accusation of physical discipline. "Cheating?" Diane's voice rose in disbelief. "Morgan? Never." She turned to her son. "But wait, did you say Ms. Williams hit you? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to worry you, Mom," Morgan said quietly. "You already have so much on your plate." Diane's expression hardened as she turned to Ms. Williams. "You struck my son." "Mrs. Jackson," the principal intervened, "we're still trying to establish the facts." Ms. Williams denies the allegation. "Of course she denies it," Diane said, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. "But I've seen the bruising on Morgan's back. I assumed it was from basketball practice. Morgan, why didn't you tell me the truth?" "I'm sorry, Mom." Diane straightened, her protective instincts in full force. "As for the accusation that my son cheated, that's completely ridiculous. Morgan has been teaching himself advanced mathematics for years. His room is full of textbooks. He corresponds regularly with Professor Chen from MIT, who has been mentoring him." Ms. Williams scoffed. "A convenient story." "It's the truth," Diane insisted. "And I can prove it." She turned to Principal Jackson. "I teach developmental mathematics at the community college. I'm perfectly capable of verifying my son's abilities." The principal considered this for a moment. "Perhaps a demonstration would clear things up," she suggested. "Morgan, would you be willing to solve another advanced problem? One that Ms. Williams can verify is not from the same source as the previous equation." "That would just give him another opportunity to deceive us," Ms. Williams objected. "Actually," Mr. Bennet interjected, "I have a proposition. I have a collection of advanced mathematics problem sets in my office. Ms. Williams can select any problem at random, one that Morgan couldn't possibly have seen before. If he can work through it using the same methods he demonstrated earlier, that would seem to validate his claim. Principal Jackson nodded. That sounds reasonable. And what about the more serious accusation? Diane demanded. My son being physically struck by a teacher. We'll address that separately, the principal assured her. But first, let's resolve the immediate issue of academic integrity. Mr. Bennett left to retrieve his problem sets. During the tense silence that followed, 2 members of the school board arrived, having been on campus for a scheduled meeting with the principal. Please, join us, Principal Jackson invited after explaining the situation. Your perspective might be valuable here. When Mr. Bennett returned with a thick binder, Ms. Williams selected a problem at random, another differential equation, but with a different structure than the first. Solve this, she challenged Morgan, her tone making it clear she expected failure. Everyone watched as Morgan studied the problem, then began to work it out on the whiteboard in the conference room. His mother observed with quiet pride, occasionally nodding at his methodology. The conference room was silent except for the soft squeak of the marker as Morgan worked through the differential equation. Ms. Williams watched with increasing discomfort, her earlier confidence giving way to uncertainty as Morgan methodically applied techniques that were clearly familiar to him. Mrs. Garcia leaned toward Diane and whispered, "Has he always been this advanced in mathematics?" "Since he was little," Diane replied quietly. "Numbers just make sense to him. But it's not just natural talent, he works incredibly hard." Morgan finished the problem and stepped back from the whiteboard. "I believe that's the correct solution," he said, echoing his words from earlier that day. Mr. Bennett examined the work carefully, then nodded. "The approach is sound, and the solution appears correct." He turned to Ms. Williams. "This is consistent with a student who has genuine understanding of advanced differential equations, not someone who memorized a single problem." Ms. Williams's face had drained of color. She seemed unable to formulate a response. One of the school board members, Dr. Lawson, cleared her throat. "I have a PhD in applied mathematics, and I can confirm that the young man's work demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of the material. This goes well beyond high school curriculum." Principal Jackson turned to Morgan. "How did you develop this level of mathematical knowledge, Morgan?" Morgan glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "I started teaching myself from books I found at the library. Then Mom brought home a calculus textbook from the college, and I worked through it. When I had questions, I'd look for answers online, which is how I found Professor Chen's lectures." "And this Professor Chen, he's been mentoring you?" the principal asked. "Yes, ma'am. We email regularly. He sends me problems to work on and reviews my solutions. He's been helping me prepare for the International Mathematical Olympiad." The second school board member, Mr. Washington, looked impressed. "The IMO is extremely competitive. Only the top students in the country qualify." Diane reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I have some of Morgan's correspondence with Professor Chen. And his standardized test scores." She handed the phone to Principal Jackson. "Morgan scored in the 99.9th percentile on the SAT math section when he took it as a practice test last year." The principal scrolled through the emails, her eyebrows rising. "These are quite remarkable. Professor Chen clearly thinks very highly of your abilities, Morgan." Ms. Williams finally found her voice. "Even if he does have some aptitude for mathematics, that doesn't explain or excuse his disrespectful behavior in my classroom." "Standing because sitting causes pain is disrespectful?" Diane asked sharply. "Mom," Morgan said quietly. He turned to the adults in the room. "I never meant any disrespect. I love mathematics, it's been my passion for as long as I can remember. I just couldn't sit comfortably after." He trailed off, looking at Ms. Williams. The tension in the room shifted as everyone was reminded of the second, more serious accusation. "About the incident 3 weeks ago," Principal Jackson began carefully. "Morgan, do you have any witnesses to what happened?" "Jasmine Carter saw it," Morgan said. "And Darius Williams. They were both in the classroom." "And the bruising your mother mentioned?" Morgan hesitated, then nodded. It's mostly healed now, but it was pretty bad for the first week or so. This is outrageous, Ms. Williams burst out. You're all taking the word of a teenager over a teacher with 23 years of experience. No one has made any final determinations yet, Ms. Williams, Principal Jackson replied firmly. But we take all allegations of this nature very seriously. Dr. Lawson, the school board member, leaned forward. Morgan, what made you decide to speak up about this today, after keeping silent for 3 weeks? Morgan considered the question. I was willing to just stand at the back of the class and get through the year. But when Ms. Williams accused me of cheating, of dishonesty, over something I've worked so hard to learn, something I love. He shook his head. I couldn't let that stand. There was a quiet dignity in his words that seemed to affect everyone in the room. Even Ms. Williams appeared momentarily shaken. Diane placed her hand on her son's shoulder. Morgan has always been honest to a fault. He would never cheat, he'd rather fail honestly than succeed dishonestly. I think it's clear that Morgan has exceptional mathematical abilities, Mr. Bennett said. As for the other matter, we'll need to interview the students Morgan mentioned and conduct a proper investigation. In the meantime, Principal Jackson added, Ms. Williams, I believe it would be best if you took administrative leave while we look into these allegations. Administrative leave? Ms. Williams repeated incredulously. Based on an unsubstantiated accusation. It's standard procedure in cases involving potential physical discipline, Dr. Lawson explained gently. Surely you understand the need to be thorough. Ms. Williams looked around the room, seemingly realizing for the first time how serious the situation had become. Her face paled further as the professional implications began to sink in. I've dedicated my life to teaching, she said, her voice suddenly smaller. My methods may be strict, but they get results. There are lines that should never be crossed, Mr. Washington said firmly. If what Morgan says is true, you crossed one of those lines. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Ms. Williams remained on administrative leave while the school conducted its investigation. Jasmine and Darius were interviewed, both confirming Morgan's account of what had happened 3 weeks earlier. Several other students came forward with their own stories of Ms. Williams' harsh disciplinary methods, though none involved physical punishment. A substitute teacher took over the mathematics class, creating a more relaxed atmosphere that most students appreciated. Morgan still stood at the back of the classroom, but now it was by choice, the pain in his back had finally subsided. On Thursday afternoon, Morgan was called to Principal Jackson's office. He was surprised to find not only the principal but also his mother, Mr. Bennett, and a woman he didn't recognize. Morgan, this is Dr. Eleanor Stevens from the University Mathematics Program, Principal Jackson introduced them. She'd like to speak with you. Dr. Stevens extended her hand with a warm smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, Morgan. I've heard remarkable things about your mathematical abilities. Morgan shook her hand, confused. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Stevens reached out to us after speaking with Professor Chen, his mother explained, barely containing her excitement. Apparently, your mentor has been singing your praises in academic circles. Professor Chen shared some of your work with me, Dr. Stevens confirmed. It's exceptional, especially coming from someone your age. Our university runs an advanced mathematics program for gifted students, and we would like to offer you a place. Morgan's eyes widened. Really? The program would allow you to take university-level mathematics courses while completing your high school education, Dr. Stevens explained. You would attend special classes at the university twice a week and complete additional coursework online. It's designed for students like you who have already moved beyond the standard curriculum. This is an incredible opportunity, Morgan, Principal Jackson said. The school would fully support your participation and make any necessary scheduling accommodations. Morgan looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. What do you think, Mom? I think it's perfect for you, Diane said, her eyes shining with pride. This is the kind of challenge you've been needing. As they discussed the details of the program, Morgan felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement about the opportunity, but also a lingering sadness about how it had come about. The situation with Ms. Williams cast a shadow over what should have been an unreservedly happy moment. "There's something else you should know," Principal Jackson said once they had finished discussing the university program. "The school board has completed its preliminary investigation regarding Ms. Williams." The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Based on the evidence gathered, including testimony from multiple students and certain physical evidence, they have determined that Ms. Williams violated our corporal punishment policy. She has been placed on extended administrative leave pending a formal disciplinary hearing. Morgan nodded slowly, unsure how to feel. He hadn't wanted to get Ms. Williams in trouble, he'd simply wanted to defend himself against the accusation of cheating. Additionally, the principal continued, "The board is reviewing our reporting procedures. They're concerned that a student felt unable to report physical disciplinary action for fear of not being believed." "Will there be changes?" Diane asked. "Yes. We're implementing several new policies, including anonymous reporting options and clearer guidelines for what constitutes appropriate classroom management." On their way out of the meeting, Morgan and his mother encountered two school board members in the hallway, Dr. Lawson and Mr. Washington, who had been present during the confrontation the previous week. "Ah, the Jacksons," Dr. Lawson greeted them. "We were just discussing your situation. How are you, Morgan?" "I'm good, thank you," Morgan replied politely. "We wanted you to know that we're taking this matter very seriously," Mr. Washington assured them. "No student should ever fear physical discipline in our schools." "Thank you," Diane said. "That means a lot to us." As they walked to the parking lot, Morgan's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler, "News about Williams is all over school. You okay?" Morgan typed back, "Yeah. Just got offered a spot in a university math program." The reply came immediately, "Dude. That's awesome. See. Sometimes standing up, literally, pays off." Morgan smiled at the pun, but as he climbed into his mother's car, he couldn't help wondering about Ms. Williams. What would happen to her now? Would she lose her job? The thought brought him no satisfaction. "Penny for your thoughts," his mother asked as she started the engine. "I was just thinking about Ms. Williams," Morgan admitted. "I never wanted to get her fired." Diane reached over and squeezed his hand. "You didn't get her fired, Morgan. Her own actions did that. You just had the courage to tell the truth." As they drove home, Morgan gazed out the window, contemplating how quickly life could change, how one moment of standing your ground could open doors you never knew existed. 2 weeks passed. Morgan had started the university mathematics program and was thriving in the challenging environment. His classmates had treated him differently since the incident, with a new respect that sometimes bordered on awe. It wasn't entirely comfortable, but it was better than being ignored or, worse, targeted. Ms. Williams' disciplinary hearing was scheduled for the following week. Morgan had been asked to testify but was dreading it. Reliving the experience in front of a panel of administrators and union representatives wasn't his idea of a good time. On Saturday morning, Morgan was at the kitchen table working through a set of problems Dr. Stevens had assigned when the doorbell rang. His mother answered it, and Morgan heard a familiar voice that made him freeze, "Ms. Williams." "I'd like to speak with Morgan, if that's possible," she was saying, her tone lacking its usual sharp edge. "I don't think that's appropriate," his mother replied coolly. "Please, Mrs. Jackson. I understand your concerns, but I need to apologize to your son." There was a long pause before his mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Ms. Williams is here," she said unnecessarily. "She wants to talk to you. It's entirely up to you if you want to see her." Morgan hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's okay. I'll talk to her." His mother's expression made it clear she didn't approve, but she respected his decision. "We'll be in the living room. I'll be right there the whole time." Ms. Williams looked different out of school, smaller somehow, less intimidating in casual clothes with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She sat stiffly on the edge of the couch while Morgan took the armchair across from her. His mother positioned herself nearby, pretending to read a book but clearly monitoring every word. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Ms. Williams began. This isn't easy for me." Morgan waited silently. "I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks," she continued. "About my teaching methods, about how I've treated students, how I treated you specifically." She took a deep breath. "I was wrong to hit you, Morgan. It was wrong professionally, ethically, and personally. There's no excuse for it, and I'm deeply sorry." The apology seemed genuine, which surprised Morgan. He'd expected defensiveness or perhaps a carefully worded non-apology crafted by a lawyer. "I was also wrong to accuse you of cheating," she continued. "I couldn't accept that a student, especially one I had dismissed as disruptive, could have knowledge that I didn't expect or understand. That was my pride talking, and it was inexcusable." Morgan nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." "I've been teaching for 23 years, Ms. Williams said, a hint of her old confidence returning. "I've always prided myself on maintaining high standards and strict discipline. I believed it was the best way to prepare students for the real world." "By hitting them?" Diane interjected sharply. Ms. Williams flinched. "No. That was wrong. I crossed a line I never should have crossed. But even my other methods, the public criticism, the rigid expectations, I'm beginning to see how they've hurt more than helped." She turned back to Morgan. "When you solved that equation, it shook something loose in me. It made me question everything I thought I knew about teaching, about students, about myself." Morgan was unsure how to respond. Part of him was still angry, still hurt by her actions. But another part recognized the difficulty of admitting such fundamental mistakes. "I've been meeting with a counselor," Ms. Williams volunteered into the silence. "He's helping me understand why I became so rigid. So afraid of losing control." She gave a small, sad smile. "Apparently, I have some issues to work through." "What happens now?" Morgan asked. "With your job, I mean." "The hearing is next week. I'll plead guilty to the charges, no excuses, no deflections. I've already offered my resignation, effective immediately. It's better that way." "You're leaving teaching?" Morgan was surprised by how conflicted this made him feel. "I don't know yet. I might, eventually. But first, I need to relearn what teaching is supposed to be. I've applied to a program that helps educators develop more positive disciplinary approaches." She hesitated. "Your testimony at the hearing will likely be a deciding factor in whether I'm allowed to continue in education at all." The implication hung in the air between them. "I'm not asking you to lie," Ms. Williams clarified quickly. "You should tell the absolute truth. I just wanted you to know that I am truly sorry, and I am committed to changing." Morgan considered her words carefully. "I appreciate your apology, Ms. Williams. And I hope you do get the help you need. But I can't promise anything about the hearing. I have to tell them what happened." "I understand," she nodded. "That's all I can ask." As she rose to leave, she paused. "One more thing, Morgan. Your mathematical abilities are extraordinary. Don't let anyone, especially not a teacher who was too proud to see it, make you doubt that or hide it again." After she left, Morgan sat quietly, processing the conversation. "You okay?" his mother asked, sitting beside him. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." 6 months later, the halls of Westridge High School looked the same, but much had changed. Morgan no longer stood at the back of his mathematics class, partly because his back had fully healed, but mostly because he was rarely there. 3 days a week, he attended advanced courses at the university, thriving under the guidance of Dr. Stevens and other professors who challenged and nurtured his mathematical talents. In the aftermath of the incident, the school had implemented new policies regarding disciplinary actions and reporting procedures. Students were now encouraged to report any concerns through an anonymous system, and teachers underwent additional training on appropriate classroom management techniques. Ms. Williams had completed her disciplinary process. Morgan had testified truthfully at her hearing, describing both the physical discipline and her accusation of cheating. But he had also acknowledged her subsequent apology and apparent commitment to change. The board had ruled that she would be suspended without pay for 1 semester and required to complete extensive professional development before being considered for reinstatement. On a warm spring afternoon, Morgan stood behind a podium in the university lecture hall, presenting his research project to an audience of mathematics students, professors, and a small group from Westridge High, including Principal Jackson and Mr. Bennett. And so, Morgan concluded, by applying this modified approach to differential equations, we can more efficiently model certain types of ecological systems, particularly those with periodic external forces. The applause was enthusiastic. As people gathered around him afterward with questions and congratulations, Morgan spotted a familiar figure at the back of the hall, Ms. Williams. She looked different, more relaxed somehow, with a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She made no attempt to approach him, simply giving a small nod of acknowledgement from a distance. Later, as the crowd thinned, she finally made her way over. "That was an impressive presentation, Morgan," she said. "Congratulations." "Thank you," he replied, surprised but not uncomfortable. "Are you back at Westridge?" She shook her head. "Not yet. I'm still completing my professional development courses. But Principal Jackson invited me to attend today's symposium." She hesitated. "I wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm doing well," Morgan said. "The university program has been amazing." "I can tell. Your confidence has grown." She smiled again, a genuine expression so unlike the tight, controlling smile he remembered from her classroom. "I've grown too, I hope. The past 6 months have been educational." There was an awkward pause before she continued. "I'm working with a group that trains teachers in positive discipline techniques now. Using my experience as a cautionary tale." She gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Not how I imagined my career would go, but it feels like important work." Morgan nodded. "It is important. Teachers have a lot of power over students' lives." "Yes, they do," she agreed soberly. "Power that should be used to build up, not tear down. I understand that now." As they talked, Morgan realized something unexpected: he had forgiven her. Not because she deserved it or had earned it, but because holding on to anger would only limit his own growth. "I should go," Ms. Williams said eventually. "But I wanted to tell you that I've been accepted into a master's program in educational psychology. I'm focusing on how to identify and nurture exceptional abilities in students, especially those from underrepresented groups." She smiled slightly. "You inspired that, in a way." As she turned to leave, Morgan called after her, "Ms. Williams, I hope you find your way back to teaching. Not everyone gets a second chance to do things right." She nodded, eyes bright with what might have been tears. "Thank you, Morgan. That means more than you know." As Morgan watched her walk away, he felt a sense of closure. Their paths had crossed in a painful way, but both had emerged stronger and wiser. Sometimes, he reflected, the most difficult equations in life didn't have simple solutions, but working through them honestly, step by step, was the only way to reach the truth. His mother joined him, slipping her arm around his shoulders. "Ready to go? We're celebrating at your favorite restaurant tonight." Morgan smiled, ready to move forward into a future bright with possibilities. "Absolutely. Let's go." Dear friend, stories like Morgan's remind us that talent and brilliance exist everywhere, often hidden behind assumptions and prejudices. When we judge students based on appearances or behavior without understanding their circumstances, we risk extinguishing incredible potential. Every child deserves educators who see their full humanity and nurture their unique gifts. As viewers, we can help create a world where no student has to prove their worth through extraordinary means just to be treated with dignity. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can amplify narratives that challenge biases and celebrate the resilience of those who overcome them. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter.